At this time, it is my humble pleasure to introduce to you our special guest for Bible study this morning. He is the Dr. Marvin Mcmickle. He's one of the most respected preachers in the nation. He served as a pastor of Antioch Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio, for nearly 25 years before becoming president of Colgate, Rochester, Crozer Divinity School in Rochester, New York. A prolific author, Mcmickle has more than a dozen books to his credit, including Be My Witness, The Great Commission for Preachers, and other resources for preaching and ministry and African American history. Baltimore-Washington Conference, put your hands together as we welcome Dr. Marvin Mcmickle.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is the day the Lord has made, and we will rejoice and be glad in it. I was definitely in a spiritual mood as the praise team was singing, and then I heard "Stand By Me." And if they hadn't put that last change in there, Jesus, I would have gone back to my earlier years when I was singing that song to other people for other purposes. Great song by Ben E. King, and thanks to the music group. Give them a hand for a marvelous job. So I have a series of slides. I'm not sure if they're going to show or not. If not, then I'll just talk. But let's see. There we go. Okay. So at least for this morning, I want to talk with you from the 16th chapter of Luke, verses 19 through 22. Now, the passage goes on beyond verse 22, but for purposes of our discussion, we're going to stop there because there is within that tight section of verses the point that I would like to make today. Before I start, let me acknowledge the presence of the bishop and thank her so very much for this invitation to come and share with her in this annual conference. I stuck my head in last night. I arrived late because my flight was delayed, and I caught her in full stride as she was preaching. And I said, wow, wow, wow. So to come behind her is a great honor. Thank you so much for this invitation. To all of the members of the Baltimore-Washington Conference of the United Methodist Church, all the clergy, all the lay leaders, all of the officers of the conference, to my trusted aide and guide, Sister Gross, who has been walking me through this complex of buildings. It's a great joy to be with you again. I was with the bishop at a much smaller event last year, and for some reason thought that event was this event until I saw the crowd last night and said, no, that event was not this event. This is a different matter. So I'm thankful for yet a second exposure to United Methodism. At our school, Colgate, Rochester, Crozer Divinity School, Methodist students are a significant part of our student body. We are certified by the University Senate to offer instruction to Methodist students, and I certainly bring you greetings from our resident Methodist historian and theologian, Dr. John Tyson, whose books you may know, major scholar in the work of both John and Charles Wesley. So Luke 16, verses 19 through 22, and I want to just talk my way through this passage and call out some points as we go along. So it begins with this. There was a rich man dressed in purple and fine linen, who ate sumptuously every day. Now, each one of those phrases needs to be dissected. There was a rich man. Now, that can mean any number of things until you continue to read, because each of the following descriptors tells us how rich. Rich is a relative term until you see it being manifested. So there was a rich man dressed in purple. So the first indicator is that he is dressed in a garment or in garments that were dyed with the most expensive dye. He was wearing purple. Purple was worn either by royalty or by the wealthy. The average person would never be able to afford anything purple. So the first distinguishing characteristic of this rich man is that he is dressed. Now, it didn't say he was wearing a purple necktie or a purple pocket square or a purple scarf draped around his neck. It said he was dressed in robe, all of it purple. So this is the first sign of wealth. And beneath the purple robe, it says, and fine linen. So think Egyptian cotton. Think anything that only the richest person could buy, and then see this man doubling up. Purple, fine linen, descriptor. How rich was he? And he ate sumptuously. Now, they could have stopped with just said, and he ate. We all eat. But he ate sumptuously, but he did not eat sumptuously at Thanksgiving. I eat sumptuously at Thanksgiving. I eat sumptuously for Christmas. I do not eat sumptuously every day, but as a sign of his extravagant wealth. He ate sumptuously. He ate to the full of the finest foods every day. There was a rich man. How rich? Dressed in purple and fine linen, who ate sumptuously every day. It goes on. At his gate. Not his front door. You could not get to his front door without first getting past his gate. Think gated community. Think guard booths. Think secured properties where one has to be buzzed not into the front door, but onto the grounds of the property itself. How rich? Dressed in purple, fine linen, ate sumptuously every day, and at his gate. And on that phrase comes the contrast. At his gate, they laid a beggar named Lazarus. I want you to begin to see this contrast and this coexistence. There was a rich man, so rich that everything he did was exorbitant. What he wore, what he ate, where he lived. And at his gate, they laid a beggar named Lazarus. How miserable was Lazarus' condition? It says, first of all, they laid him at the gate. He could not walk. He was crippled, paralyzed, otherwise immobile. And so people had to bring him to wherever it was he was going to be positioned. At his gate, they laid a beggar, perhaps to gather alms, perhaps to be seen by the passersby in the hope that they would take some pity on him. They laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered in sores. Now, I don't think anyone thinks that this was leprosy. Because if it was leprosy, nobody would have carried him physically to this location. So it is some other boils or some Job-like condition, who knows? But from head to toe, he is not covered in purple. He is not covered in fine linen. He is covered in sores. And the text says, and the dogs came and licked his sores. Now, I remind you that in the Greek language, there are two words for dogs. One is with reference to very small, tiny, not so much household pets, but tiny animals whose existence is tolerated. The other word is for scavengers, animals that live off of the garbage heap. This word for the dogs came are scavengers. So here's the visual that Luke wants us to appreciate. The dog that is licking the open sores on the body of Lazarus is using the same tongue that had been used to eat out of the garbage heap. Is Lazarus better off or worse off? Because a scavenger dog is licking the open sores on his body with whatever are the remnants of the garbage heap. So let me just reset the stage. Side by side, there was a rich man dressed in purple and fine linen, who ate sumptuously every day. At his gate, scene change, they laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered in sores, who would have eaten the crumbs. This works best in Greek, but it works just as well in English. Catch the tense. Who would have eaten the crumbs. It didn't say he ate the crumbs. It didn't say he was too proud to eat the crumbs. It didn't say he refused the crumbs. It said he would have eaten the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. He didn't want to come and sit at the table. He didn't want a full meal. He would have been content to eat the crumbs from the rich man's table. If the crumbs had been offered, he would have eaten the crumbs. He wasn't looking for a ham hock. He wasn't looking for a side of beef. He would have been content with the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. This is the accidental food that we don't eat because it slipped off the plate and fell to the ground. This is the stuff in the really fancy restaurants where someone comes with a little silver or gold thing and scrapes along the table to get all the crumbs off the table and then dumps them in his lap or into her napkin, and they just take this. That's what Lazarus would have eaten. Except it wasn't offered. The text goes on. They both die. Lazarus wakes up in the bosom of Abraham. The rich man wakes up in hell. Now, here is the hermeneutical question. Here's where the theology confronts us. Why does the rich man go to hell? The answer cannot be, in this instance, because he is rich. Because Abraham was rich. Abraham was rich. All kind of goats and sheep and cattle and so forth. So no, so it's not because he was rich, because Lazarus is with a rich man in heaven. So why does the rich man go to hell? And the answer is because he paid no attention. He did not respond to. His eyes were not open and his heart was not open to the poor man who sat just outside his gate. Think about coming and going. He could not have gotten into his property without passing Lazarus. He could not have gotten out of his property without passing Lazarus, who, by the way, would have eaten the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. The rich man went to hell because he did not pay attention to the condition of poverty and desperation just outside his door. I give you two comic characters to visualize this issue of not paying attention to the poverty, the need, the want, and sort of the contrast of affluence on the one hand and abject poverty on the other. The first is from the comic strip Garfield, Sunday version. I read the comic strips every day. I don't mind confessing. I'm old enough now not to apologize for reading the comic strips. I sometimes start there, or sometimes I start on the headlines, which is also a comic strip some days. But in Garfield, on a Sunday, it's 6 panels. So you have time to tell a story. So on the first panel, this is the Sunday just after Thanksgiving some years ago. Garfield is seated alone at a table in front of a Thanksgiving banquet. Now this is a cat eating turkey and dressing and rolls, and he's got a goblet, and the sign of aroma is wafting up from the plate. That's the first panel. It's Garfield by himself, feasting. Second panel is Odie the dog. It's chained up in the backyard to a post with an empty food bowl and an empty water bowl. And it's snowing. In the third panel, you get a look at Odie from Garfield's point of view. You're looking out the window, as it were, over the shoulder of Garfield, and you look at the poor condition of Odie the dog. So here, over the shoulder, all the food for Garfield. Out the window, poor Odie, chained to a post in the snow, no food, no water. Third panel. Fourth panel, Garfield gets up and approaches the window, and one's heart begins to soar. One of two things is now about to happen. Either Garfield is going to hand a drumstick out the window to Odie, or even better, he's going to invite Odie to come in and join him at his table. Fourth panel. Fifth panel, Garfield shuts the drapes. To block out the view of Odie. Sixth panel, Garfield is now back at his seat and says to himself, that's better. He saw Odie. He knew the condition of Odie. He even got a closer view of Odie. But instead of responding to what he saw, because he closed his heart, if not his eyes, he was prepared to close the draperies so as not to see what was just outside his gate. In Charlie Brown, standard comic strip, first panel, Charlie Brown is walking down the street. He is in a wintry scene, wearing a coat, hat, scarf, gloves, boots. He is so warm that the comic writer has rays of heat coming up out of his head. He's just covered in warmth. Second panel is Snoopy walking toward Charlie Brown, and he is also exposed to the bad weather, and he is depicted as having icicles hanging from his ears and hanging from his nose, and he is so cold that the letters BR, 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 brr, are coming up out of his head. Here's a contrast. Charlie Brown, warm to the point of almost perspiration. And Snoopy, cold to the point of hypothermia. Third panel. They meet, and Charlie Brown says to Snoopy, in the words of the book of James, be warm. In the fourth panel, there's just Snoopy with Charlie Brown having walked away and a question mark over his head, as if to ask, how do I be warm if you have taken with you your hat and your coat, your scarf and your gloves, your boots and everything else, and have simply left me uncovered but encouraged? Uncovered, but encouraged. Be encouraged, my brother. The Lord will provide. He did. With your hat, your boots, your scarf, your coat, your gloves that you kept while you just told me to be warm. There was a rich man dressed in purple and fine linen, who ate sumptuously. Every day at his gate they laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered in sores. The dogs came and licked his sores, and he would have eaten the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. And they both died, and one went to heaven, and one went to hell, and the one who went to hell because he, in that case, did not pay attention to the suffering just outside his gate. Now, here's my caution for the Baltimore-Washington conference. Do not let your church because either of your ministry vision or your preaching. Don't let your whole church wake up in hell. And you will say, well, but we were good Methodists. We knew our Wesley hymns and theology. We went through the prayer book appropriately. I was always at church. I was a faithful person in the choir or on the elders board or whatever your leadership structure might be. Why am I in hell? It is not because of your ritual. The prophets tell us the problem with ritual of any kind is that we make it a substitute for righteousness. And we applaud ourselves for the perfection of our ritual. How we pray, how we preach, the garments that we wear, the order by which we proceed through the worship service. We are careful about the tithe. We are careful about the culture. We are careful about the ritual. And the prophets say God does not care. If all you are offering to God is ritual, but you are not paying attention to him, her, or them, just outside the door of your church, you may well wake up in hell. Now you can negotiate from there. You can say, well, now, Lord, see, this, as they say it at home, this is what had happened. What had happened was that nobody told me about this. I want to jump ahead, if I could, to a quote from Gutierrez. This is slide 4 for those who are in charge of the slides. I'm going to go ahead. I want you to read this quote from Gustavo Gutierrez, Peruvian liberation theologian, to see whether or not there is any excuse for us not to notice Lazarus. He says all theological inquiry is contextual. Our context today is characterized by the glaring disparity between the rich and the poor. No serious Christian can quietly ignore this situation. It is no longer possible for someone to say, well, I did not know about the suffering of the poor. Poverty has a visibility that it did not have in the past. The faces of the poor must now be confronted. You might have said, in a world before there was cable news, 24-hour news cycles, when the suffering of people in abandoned locations, whether rural locations in this country or remote locations someplace else, you might have been able to say, well, I did not know that poverty was as bad as it is. But Gutierrez's point is you cannot say that today. We have seen it. We know people who are struggling with that. The problem is that having seen poverty, having seen economic injustice, having seen wealth disparity, we have made a conscious decision to go to church. and worship. On the way to church, many of us pass through places of poverty. On the way from church, on our way to brunch, we drive through places of poverty. So we go to church driving a $35,000, $40,000 car, wearing an outfit which probably, at the very least, cost us $1,000 head to toe. And we're dressed in purple and fine linen. And we go to brunch, and we pay $50, $60 plus tip for Cracker Barrel or Cheesecake Factory or whatever. And when the mission plate comes along, we take out a $300 Mont Blanc fountain pen to write the Lord a $10 check. And comfort ourselves by saying, I made a sacrificial gift to the poor. No, you didn't. You didn't even give the poor the crumbs that fell from your table. Here's a quote from Martin King. I'm back on slide 2. This is from his 1963 I Have a Dream speech. This is the part of the speech that nobody wants to quote. Boy, we love that end of the speech. I have a dream. That was perfect. That was perfect rhetoric. That is just flawless rhetoric. We call it I have a dream speech because it's projected outward. This is what I hope will happen someday. We overlook the beginning of the speech, which was much less, sort of endearing. It was much more confrontational. He said in 1963 that African Americans, and I would now say many other groups, live on islands of poverty in the midst of a great sea of what he called material prosperity. Some folks live on islands of poverty, surrounded by a great sea of material prosperity. Now, I want to take that phrase and flip it and suggest the following: that many churches and their congregants are an island of prosperity, surrounded by a great sea of poverty. The contrast between the folks who go into the church and the folks who live in the neighborhood around some of those churches is so startling. It is a Luke 16 revelation. Slide 3. There are one of 3 options. One is that this is taken from my book, Where Have All the Prophets Gone? Many Christians worship in immaculately maintained churches that are situated in neighborhoods that look like bombed out war zones. The church is spectacular. The folks inside are, by and large, if not well off, at least not living a starvation life. But look outside the door. Go 1 mile from your church. No, 1 block, if you have an inner city church. Or many Christians drive from the suburbs to churches located within a community that has been ravaged by poverty, drug trafficking, the loss of industry. So you don't live there anymore. You moved out. You are George and Louise Jefferson. I'm moving on up. But who or what have you left behind? And since you are drawn to your local church, you go back every Sunday. And the contrast is where you live versus where you worship. But are you seeing the people and the predicament in which they live? Or three, you've just given up on the city altogether. Not only have you moved to the suburbs, but you moved your church there too. So that there is no possibility that you will ever have to confront that poor soul at your front gate because he can't get there. I have a friend, a dear friend, still, who moved the church from a neighborhood in Cleveland to a place that is an outer ring suburb, so far off the road that you can't get Lazarus there. And I think that was the point. I want to be in a place where I will not be bothered by, troubled by, confronted by, worried by the uncomfortable notion that I have to see those people. I don't know where your church is. I don't know your proximity to Lazarus. All I know is you cannot say that you do not know. Slide 5. Steele Gutierrez, this in bold print is the source, the American Magazine, which is a Roman Catholic publication. An active concern for the poor is not only an obligation for those who feel a political vocation. All Christians, not all clergy, all Christians, not all Baptists, all Christians must take the gospel message of justice and equality seriously. Christians cannot forego their responsibility to say a prophetic word about unjust economic conditions. Poverty poses a major challenge to every Christian conscience. Now, let's stop there. Does it? Does the state of poverty for people in your neighborhood, in your city, in your state, in your country, in the world, does it pose a problem for your conscience? When you see it, are you troubled? When you are asked to respond to it, are we generous? Or are we like there was a rich man dressed in purple and fine linen who ate sumptuously every day? At his gate, they laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered in sores, who would have eaten the crumb that fell from the rich man's table, and the dogs came and licked his sores. When I was a youngster, they used to say that the dog had a name. His name was Moreover, because the text says, moreover, the dog came to lick the sore. So his name was not Rover, it was Moreover the dog. Here is one of these synoptic patterns. Here's a reference that both Mark, Matthew, and Luke all decide to retain in almost precisely the same language pattern. It is easier, but not impossible. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Not impossible, but it's hard, particularly in our culture, in our country, in our society, where the accumulation of wealth becomes part of our self-definition, and where we pride ourselves on our ability to outgrow the circumstances of our birth. And we say to others, I pull myself up, why don't you pull yourself up? So we cut programs. We cut back on the ways by which persons historically could have pulled themselves up and simply say, make it on your own. How'd you make it? If you weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth, then I suspect someone helped you to get where you are today. Now, I was born in poverty. I was born in 1948 on the south side of Chicago. By the age of 10, my father had left us. My mother was left to raise two sons. My brother was so desperate to get out of our environment that he spent 26 months in Vietnam because he said he felt safer in Vietnam than he felt at home. First 13 months, he was drafted in. The next 13 months, he volunteered for it. He didn't want to come back to the South Side. I was 4 years younger. I was in high school. I was about to graduate, and I went to see my high school guidance counselor to find out what she thought I should do next. I had reasonably good grades, and she was telling people of much lesser academic achievement than I had that they should go off to college. Of course you should go off to college. But when I got in there, she said to me, well, now, Marvin, you know, you don't really have what it takes to make it in college. You don't have a college-level brain. You would make a good car mechanic, a good carpenter. No disrespect to mechanics or carpenters. We need more of them. But I was being told that that was the maximum level of my potential. Therefore, don't aspire for anything more. So she was feeding me a diet of underachievement. I went home and told my mother, 5'2", to stop the college savings fund. Now, it wasn't much in those days. A course was $33 a credit hour. But, okay, so was our income. So, okay, we didn't have any money to go to college, but she was saving bit by bit. I was working night and day trying to go to college. I said, we should just forget it because the guidance counselor told me that I don't have a college-level brain. And then Mama kicked in. And she said, well, now let me see. I don't remember that the guidance counselor has a vote on this. I don't see her around the table. I don't see her at bedtime. She's not a part of the household. She gets no vote. There are only 3 votes on this, she said. I and your mother, I got a vote. I vote yes. You are my son. I'm telling you, you're voting yes. God has a vote. God told me God is voting yes. So let's just go on and we'll see what happens. So off I go to college with no brain. And I graduate. Brainless. Like the scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz. I go to Union Seminary and Columbia University and graduate. No brain. I get 2 earned doctorates. Brainless. When I got the first one at Princeton Seminary, on the stage of Dodge Chapel on the campus of Princeton, I'm coming across the stage with my cap and my gown to get my hood. Now, I'm from the south side of Chicago. I'm on the Princeton campus. You know I'm doing the south side strut. You know it. I would have put the Temptations to shame on that day. But while I'm strutting across the stage to get my hood, out of the corner of my eye, I see my mother walking to the end of the stage. Now, she is the only mother over there. Nobody else's mother. All the other mothers are seated as they should have been in the audience. Here's my mother coming to the stage. So, I get my hood and I continue my stroll, and I get to the staircase and I said to her, why are you here? Why are you standing here? She said, I want to ask you something. I said, what do you want to ask me? Where is the guidance counselor? Who told us that we do not have a brain for college level work. Here's the point. People who are born in poverty, people who are born with deprivation, people who are born into circumstances from which it may appear there is no way out, can, with someone's intervention, with someone whispering a word of encouragement to them and not giving up on them because of the environment in which they were born, they might grow up one day to give a talk in front of the Baltimore-Washington Conference of the United Methodist Church. And Luke 16 is a challenge to you to go home to your home church and look outside your window and see who or what is there. Now, it might not be an African American face. It might be a migrant Hispanic food laborer in a field. It might be some Native American group living in the shadows where we have conveniently forced them. It might be people whose problem isn't so much poverty. They may have everything the world has to offer, but there is another kind of poverty. You know, there is the poverty of low expectations. There is the poverty of overestimating yourself in relationship to the rest of the population. You are poor in your assessment of other people. Who is outside your window? Or have you just moved? So folks can't get to you till they get past your gate. You cannot run from poverty. Folks who are impoverished will survive on a job or at our expense. Don't blame people who do what they think they have to do to survive from day to day. Blame the conditions in the richest country in the history of the world that allow this. Slide 6. Slide 6. Read slide 6. The United States ranks second out of 35 developed countries on the scale of what economists call relative child poverty. 23.1% of children in this country live in poverty. White children, black children, Asian children, Hispanic children. 23.1% of all children. The only country with a worse poverty level than the United States of America is Romania. Of 35 countries, did you know? Now, Marian Wright Edelman, writing for the Children's Defense Fund, says, "We are an exceptional nation." You've heard that phrase, America is an exceptional, we are an exceptional people. And we say that phrase in order to build ourselves up. We are an exceptional. In fact, some say we are the exceptional nation. She says, yes, we are. We are exceptional in our tolerance of people living in poverty. We accept it. I live in Rochester, New York. 50% of the children in poverty, in Rochester, live in poverty. 1 out of every 2 children. Why can they not read? Why won't they be still in class? Why is their attendance so sporadic? Well, you try living in poverty. You try this on for size. This is what poverty looks like. An individual living in the United States of America on $12,000 a year or $1,000 a month or $33 a day, or a family of 4 living on $23,450 a year. Now that's just regular poverty. Then there's extreme poverty, where 1.65 million Americans live, some of them in churches near you. They live on half of the poverty line, so they live on $12,000 a year or $1.90 a day in America. And then there is concentrated poverty, where we put all the poor folks together in neighborhoods and zip codes, and we wall them off so we do not have to see them and can drive around them in conveniently structured highways that prevent us from ever having to see the problem. But they will pop up. I bet you that some of you live in areas where there is a not in my backyard unwritten rule. We certainly want to have affordable housing for the poor, but not in my backyard. We want to have programs for the needy, but not in my backyard. Put it and them somewhere else. Here's why we have, and I want to stop with this slide. Here's why there is such a problem. We tolerate a steadily expanding wealth gap. The CEO, Starbucks, CVS, McDonald's, General Motors, all of these major companies earn in 1 hour what their workers earn in 6 months. If you earn $13 million a year, which is low for some CEOs, but your worker earns $40,000 a year, you will always get bigger and bigger and better, and they will never catch up, and that's if they can earn $40,000 a year. In my county, Monroe County, in New York State, we have 10,000 home health care workers. The people who come to your house after you leave the hospital to clean up after you, change your sheets, change your clothes because you have spoiled yourself. They are $9 an hour. We have just passed a law to pay fast food workers $15 an hour. We pay $15 to put a hamburger into your mouth. We pay $9 to the person who cleans up the hamburger you could not control when it comes out. Poverty is our challenge. I'm not saying it's the only one. I know that you will have other things to discuss today, other challenges. So I'm not asking you to clear the deck. What I'm saying to you is whatever you end up with on matters of human sexuality, wherever you come out on that, who you will ordain, who you won't ordain, your business. Just know that the rest of us in the Christian world are having the same debate that you are. But for the moment, I don't want to deal on that. I want to say, whatever you end up with on that issue, this one will still be here. So, there was a rich man, dressed in purple, fine linen, ate sumptuously, every day. At his gate, they laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered in sores. The dogs came and licked his sores. He would have eaten the crumbs, but they weren't offered. They both died. The poor man goes to heaven, the rich man goes to hell. Please do not let you or your church wake up in hell.